weekly Q and 4 p.m. Eastern on Sunday, that is Eastern Standard Time. I will be bringing you history topics, things to discuss over the next hour, as well tomorrow at 4. So tune into that. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. We have been doing this for over 6 months, and the live streams I think started like 2 months ago. So we kind of a summer thing that we just decided to keep going on, and now have updated to have 2 live streams in the weekend so that we can bring you history content that you will really love and hopefully really enjoy. So this is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, and usually the way the Q&A works, if you have any historical topics that you would like to discuss, please drop them in the comments and I will get to them in an orderly time. We have some really great discussions and people always asking really great things. It's a lot of fun and really enjoyable, and it helps grow the channel. So especially if you guys like and subscribe, it really helps. Thank you. Hey, welcome for coming. Welcome. Thank you for coming. So liking, subscribing, getting notified about the latest updates from the channel is really helpful. Trying to grow the channel. We just hit over 4,500 subscribers. It's been an amazing ride the last 6 months. Hello. And we are trying to get up to 5,000 if we can. That would be really awesome. Be sure to like, subscribe, all that great stuff. It really helps the channel grow. And we're trying to get up to 5,000 by the end of the year. That is the goal. And I had no idea when I took the dogs out for a walk that and made just a couple short videos. I didn't even know the difference between how you could make 15-second videos versus 60-second shorts. I was totally new to the whole darn thing. I had no idea that 6 months later we'd be sitting with 4,500 subscribers, over 600 videos, millions of views. It's been a real great ride, and I've really enjoyed it. So any historical topics that you would like to discuss or have me talk about, drop them in the channel, and I will get to them in an appropriate manner. I've got a few topics off the top of my head that I want to talk about, but if I don't get to them, that's perfectly fine, because this is a way for me to connect with you, the viewer, and those who support the channel. So we always have a fun time. We've got some really good regulars who always show up and ask some really great questions and talk about some really great topics. So on my mind today, at the very least, we are going to be looking at the golden age of Spain, how Spain 500, 400 years ago was probably the country to beat all over the world as the best, most powerful, and richest empire in the world. We'll talk about how at that same time in history, Poland was actually going through its golden age. So Poland, Portugal, and Spain and the Dutch were all having a veritable golden age in the early 1600s that a lot of people don't know a lot about, except maybe the Spanish. We will also be discussing the longest reigning monarch in European history, and we'll be talking about what that monarch did for their country. And I'm not playing the pronoun game because some of you might not know who that is, and I will talk about them later. So there's some topics that I've wanted to get to for a while, and some others that are kind of new. We've talked about the founding of the 13 colonies. I'm going to talk about the political impact and the history of Walt Disney, and maybe why all the characters seem to have dead mothers in Disney movies. There's a little bit of history there as well. I've talked about it in the channel before. Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming. And we will also be discussing the actual founding of Rome and the different legends and myths surrounding that, and actually probably where Rome comes from historically. So we've got some fun topics, hopefully, that you'll all really enjoy today. And that's the goal, is to talk about things that you will enjoy, things that are fun, social science based. But whatever topics or questions you have, be sure to drop them in the chat, and we will be getting to them very soon. Like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Once again, the target goal is 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year. I'm just finishing up a series on Roman emperors, so I've got a re-upload of my Constantine video. Thank you so much. The Constantine video will be re-uploaded, and I'm also doing a video probably tomorrow about the final fall of the western half of the Roman Empire. And I'll be doing a video about Justinian. I've got some full-length videos coming up that are really interesting. And starting on Monday, I am starting a new short series where we will be talking about some of the best female leaders in human history. So if you want to learn about some of the strongest and most powerful women, want to learn some herstory, as it's called, please check in. Trump or Harris? Asteroid. How do I see the election results? So I do have political analysis videos. I do talk about social sciences a lot. People ask my opinion about that stuff, and I jump in. I've always got at least one person in channel during a live stream who will bring up the Israel-Palestine issue, and one person in channel who will bring up the election. And obviously, I did a video just yesterday about the debate. So if you want to learn a little bit more about what I see, check out that video. It's a short one, but it gives you a little bit of perspective there. I try not to give my personal political opinions, but the election results are going to be interesting. I will be talking about that more as we get close to it, making a prediction. Probably going to do one of those maps because I think those are a lot of fun. So, hello, welcome. Thank you for coming. So, I got a bunch of different topics that I want to go over, but anything that you want to talk about, I'm happy to talk about. Put it in the chat. I really appreciate somebody bringing up the presidential election and saying, good. That's good to hear. That they don't want to put me in that predicament because it's a difficult one. I'm trying to be as objective as possible, but when President Biden was kind of in the decline and then dropped out of the presidential race, I realized that this election is a historical one. As a historian, I wanted to jump on it right away because it's what's called contemporary history. It's history that's happening right now. So I kind of branched the channel out into more poli-sci kind of stuff. And so far, it's been very rewarding. I've gotten some really good feedback, although some people have said that I am biased one way or another. Some people have also accused me of being a racist and a misogynist for mispronouncing certain people's names, and I just don't know where that comes from, but oh well, c'est la vie. It's what happens. It's part of the field and part of the territory. And I think I agree and speak for a lot of Americans when I say that, and probably a lot of people who are observing this around the world, because I always appreciate people from around the world checking into the channel. It's always a lot of fun to see, because like right now it's 10 o'clock or not 10, 11 o'clock, I think, in England. But interestingly enough, I tend to think that this race is basically a toss-up and could go either way. And I've tended to believe that the former president has had the advantage throughout. I think the debate might have changed that a little bit, but we'll see exactly what happens. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Yeah. So, anyways, if you don't worry about timing. Just ask a question whenever you have it, and I'll be sure to answer it as soon as I possibly can. So yeah, that's my answer to that question about the election. I'm not picking a side. I'm saying from my perspective and what I'm seeing, it looks like it could go either way. So, all right. So if you have any if you have any, sure, like and subscribe, and then we'll see about that. If you have any, topics you'd like to go over social science wise, please drop them in the chat and I will get to them in a proper order. I had a few things I wanted to talk about. A lot of people go back in history and they think about the fact that the United States is kind of a dominant power and has been a dominant superpower over the last century. The United States becomes really wealthy after World War I, really powerful after World War II, all of that stuff. My hair? Thank you. I really appreciate that. Anyway, so the United States has become really powerful, and people have kind of, when history happens, we're kind of just used to things being the way they are, and nobody thinks they were ever different, but they were definitely different. Before World War I and in the 18th century and before that, the United States wasn't the strongest power in the world, and the British Empire didn't really exist. If you go back all the way to the 17th century and the 1600s, you actually had the Spanish. The Spanish are the first Europeans to really colonize the New World before the English, French, and Dutch. And they obviously defeat the Aztecs and the Incas and basically allow a bunch of Native American tribes to die off either from warfare or disease and enslave the rest to take over the Caribbean and huge parts of Central America and the western part of what is now the United States and the southwestern part of the United States, as well as South America. They defeat the two major native tribes who had created empires, the Aztecs and the Incas. And by 1600, Spain is basically the unchecked power in all of Europe and, if not, all the world. So this country, which had just gotten free of being controlled by the Muslims for centuries, now has a giant land empire. You've got North America and South America under the thumb of the Spanish, and they're extracting all sorts of cash crops and goods and gold and silver and precious stones, stuff like that. Anyways, I try to be as brave and honest as possible. So what was I talking about? So the main issue is so the Spanish build a big land empire and they extract a lot of resources and they use native labor. And when the natives start dying out because they're not used to European disease, the Spanish, who are trading with the Africans, begin trading in African slaves and bring them over millions, especially in South America and a lot in the Caribbean too, to harvest the cash crops, harvest the silver, harvest the gold. Portugal's got Brazil at this time, and later the English will show up on the eastern seaboard of what's now the United States, the Atlantic coast. And the French kind of show up between Spain and England and what is now called the Midwest, the American Midwest. So Spain creates a big land empire. They're very wealthy, they're very powerful, and they seem like they're going to be dominant for the rest of human history. But things change, and the Spanish Empire declines. Their rulers are kind of weak, and they kind of just they slowly but surely start to lose their influence over Central and South America. And by the 1800s, they've lost basically all their colonies. And they kind of get bullied around by the French and later the British. And the French and the British are going to become the dominant empires in the 18th and 19th century. And Spain's kind of going to fall off a cliff. They had controlled, again, they controlled North and South America, or most of it, as well as they also controlled Portugal. This is called the Iberian Union, where the King of Spain, Philip II, who is most famous for his Spanish Armada going up against the English fleets, he actually is crowned the King of Portugal and Spain. So this is called the Iberian Union because Spain and Portugal are in the Iberian Peninsula. Fun fact, the reason that Portugal is not part of Spain is because Portugal got its independence from the Muslim conquerors known as the Moors or the Almoravids before the Spanish did. And Spain was divided into two kingdoms, Castile and Aragon. And when they get united in 1492, they're going to start building a land empire because they hire a Genoese merchant, Christopher Columbus, to go across the ocean to get to India. And he lands, of course, in the Caribbean instead. As far as I can go for. So hopefully farther than what I know before. I'm trying to learn as much as I possibly can and stuff like that. But what else? What was I going to say? Moving on. So not only are they in charge of North and South America, Spain's got a large navy. They try to defeat the English. They try to force England back into Catholicism. They fail. The English use faster, quicker fire ships and destroy their armada. But Spain isn't stopped by that. Spain's also got its claws in Italy. They control the island of Sardinia as well as Naples. So the Spanish are extraordinarily powerful in the early 1600s, and no one seems like they can stop them. But Portugal eventually gets free in 1640. Naples and Sardinia eventually get free later on in that century. And the extractive economies of Central and South America, which rely on slave labor, you start to run out of those precious resources that you have, and the Spanish become less and less powerful. Their rulers are pretty weak, and eventually you see them decline, and the British and the French start to rise. Interestingly enough, the Spanish Empire, which seemed like it would dominate the world forever, kind of falls off a cliff later in the 1600s and stuff like that. So, CC. He didn't get here by mistake. Columbus basically believed that he could get to India by going west. He thought everybody knew that you could go east to get to India, and you would have to go around the Cape of Good Hope or the bottom of Africa. And the Portuguese were doing this for a while, and everybody knew that. And Columbus just has this idea that if he goes west, he will land in India, and he thinks that he can get there going west. And the Spanish, who have just celebrated uniting their crowns, Castile and Aragon, under King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, celebrate their victory against the Muslims in kicking them out of Spain by sending Columbus west. So actually, Columbus's voyage was supposed to be a footnote in this big year called 1492, but it obviously becomes the big storyline because it's the rediscovery of America by the Europeans. But Columbus thought he had reached India, and he continued to believe that to this day. Now, I just learned recently that, contrary to popular myth, he did not call the natives Indians because he thought he was in India and these were the residents of India. He called them a people, un gente in Dios, a people in God. And so we probably get the derivative of that from Indians. So I don't think it was a mistake, but Columbus certainly felt to the end of his days that he was in India, even when he landed on the mainland in his last voyage. So let's see. Welsh history is awesome. I love talking about the Welsh. Basically, England would not have become a powerhouse militarily had it not been for the Welsh. From what I understand of the settlement of Wales, Wales was filled with Latins, Roman people who were living in Britannia. So when the last Roman legion left England in 410 AD, a bunch of people went westward and settled in that area, and they intermarried with the local Celtic peoples there, and that's where you get the formation of Wales as a distinct group separate from the rest of the English. Wales was integrated into the English kingdom in the 1300s. They were conquered by Prince Edward, who became Edward the First, Longshanks, the king from Braveheart. Before he became king, he was on crusade, and before he went on crusade, he was busy fighting on behalf of his father to defeat the Welsh, and he did defeat the Welsh, and he created, and because he defeated the Welsh, his father made him the Prince of Wales. So the reason the heir to the British throne is called the Prince of Wales is because of Prince Edward, the future Edward Longshanks, conquering the Welsh. So just some fun facts there. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you for your liking and subscribing. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel and our weekly Q&A. Be sure to drop any information, history topics you want to talk about there. We've got some good topics so far. Thank you for the shout out about my hair. Do you think the SS was the most feared unit the world has ever seen? It's one of, definitely the shock troops. I definitely think if you were fighting against the Romans and you saw Praetorian Guards, you would be really scared too. It all depends on era and type, but every giant, powerful, militaristic kingdom or empire has had a large group of soldiers who are shock troops, who are ready to fight at the drop of a hat, and they're dangerous. So thank you for joining. I really appreciate that you find it interesting. I don't know what I'm wrong about. At what point or how long does a group of people have to live in an area to be considered native? That's an interesting thing, because I really think I've coming to the historical conclusion that that we might be using native incorrectly, because basically you would think that everyone is native, but very, very few people are native because of migration patterns, because of the hunter-gatherer periods in the earliest history of humankind. I think one way that describes it is that native peoples are people groups that aren't around in a particular area at a particular time, or they stay there for a long time, and then they're eventually encountered by other people, and their history in that area goes back for centuries. So when Columbus lands in the New World, he encounters natives who have had centuries to establish a culture and a hold, even if they've migrated to these areas. So I think it's people who have been in a certain area for an extremely long time, and then they run into other groups of people. And then when other groups of people run into them, they find that they've been established there for a long time. And I think that's what makes someone native. Thank you for joining. Make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. I'm trying to grow as much as possible. We're talking about history topics. Anything you want to bring up social science related, drop it in the chat, and I will get to it in a timely order. I don't know if he had a Hebrew speaker. I think you're referring to Columbus. Wow, we got someone from Russia. So I always love it. I get people from Russia, Sweden, India, Australia. I had one guy who came in from India, and he said, I'm here, it's 4 o'clock in the morning and I can't sleep. And sure enough, I probably put him to sleep in like 5 minutes. What are my thoughts about the Muslims conquering North Africa and Spain? So Islam in its first century spreads mainly through conquest. There are many examples in history of Islam spreading peacefully and through trade, especially in Africa and India. However, the Islamic century of conquest is nothing to laugh at in military history. It is one of the greatest conquering feats. Basically, they destroy the Sassanid Persian Empire, which the Romans couldn't even destroy. They cripple the Byzantines. They take over all of the Levant area as well as the Middle East, and then they go into the Maghreb, North Africa, and they basically reconquer all of the lands that the Roman Empire had in North Africa and Spain. They get to France, and then they get their butts handed to them by Charles Martel. Who knows historically whether or not they actually wanted to conquer France, but given the spreading nature of their conquering feat between the death of Muhammad in 632 and the Battle of Tours in 732, where Martel defeated them, they were probably trying to spread into France as well. So it's no joke to look at how the Muslim Empire, first called the Umayyad Caliphate, eventually called the Umayyad Caliphate, spreads throughout the Middle East. It's a feat. It's a legendary feat. It's a huge accomplishment in huge military conquests. Oh wow, you're from Cardiff. Awesome. Or Cardiff, sorry. Cardiff, sorry. Do you know that you can read Egyptian? That's fascinating. I did not know that. I learn something every day from you guys, and I really appreciate that. Every time I have a live stream, I learn something from you guys, so I really, really appreciate that. That's fascinating. I know one thing about the Welsh linguistics. Their names are very hard to pronounce, but they always sound really awesome, and there's a lot of Llewellyns and stuff like that. I look like Mac Miller. I don't know if that's a compliment. Can you sing some history facts for us? Oh my gosh, I don't know how to quite do that. I almost want to break into We Didn't Start the Fire. That would be the best singing history facts, but that's not even history facts. It's just naming topics. Am I drunk right now? No, but you might be if you think I am. History is cool. I appreciate that. If you really like history, if you really like content, be sure to like and subscribe. I'm trying to grow the channel, get some more eyes everywhere. I really appreciate everybody coming and talking about it, history with us. Let me see. Yeah, history repeats itself. I love the quote from Mark Twain. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes a lot. That's a really good one because the truth of the matter is historical events aren't exactly the same, but there's a lot going on that kind of sounds the same. What do we know about the Balfour Declaration? Okay, yeah. So the Balfour Declaration is kind of there's a lot made of it, but basically it is an acknowledgement of the British Empire at the end of World War One that Israel was being repopulated by Jews who had been leaving different European areas during the 1800s because they were suffering heavy persecution due to anti-Semitism, the same anti-Semitism which would of course lead, unfortunately, to the Holocaust. And these Jews were going to live in Israel, and they had an ancient tie to the land, and they had some right, at least some right to the land. So the Balfour Declaration, I think a lot's made of it. It's a very simple piece of paper. It'll take you 2 minutes to read if you find it, if that. So it's not as hyped up as everybody makes it, but it does recognize some sort of ancestral and property right to the Jewish people of the land of the Levant, at least some of it. If I wasn't a musician, yeah. I mean, I'm a musician in my spare time, so I can appreciate that a lot. And history is fascinating, so I really appreciate hearing that. I am Italian. I'm Paisan as well, so we don't have any problems here. I don't know what you want me to talk about with Sodom and Gomorrah or Algeria. Hello from Poland. Welcome. Thank you for coming. I hope you guys are telling me that you're from places like Algeria, Poland, Greece. That's really, really cool. I just love having a lot of people come by. How do you fit so much knowledge into your head, man, and not forget it's expressive? I have a decent enough memory. I'm the kind of guy who makes faux pas once in a while forgetting something, but I somehow still remember to tell everybody something historical. So it's just what historians do. Historians tell the truth and they remember facts. And happy birthday, it's to Christiana. Shout out to you. Hope you have a great birthday. A third Jewish, awesome. Bonjour, welcome from France. Bienvenue. So let's see here. Have you heard of a shar, the length of time? It's one turning of a star is 20. No, that's interesting. Is that a particular measurement of time in a particular area of the world? What savages in Europe? I don't know what you mean. I mean, the British Empire is pretty interesting in the fact that it's just so expansive and large. And interestingly enough, it's one of the few empires in history that actually just decides to stop being an empire. It kind of doesn't want to decide that, but over time, with pressure from the United States and with this whole idea of people being able to determine their own countries and governments, the British Empire kind of disintegrates. But it's not something they wanted to do, but they kind of felt obligated to do over time. The Roman Empire collapses from invasions. The Mongols have to split up because they're so dang big. The French Empire fights off in places like Algeria, and of course, most embarrassingly, perhaps in Vietnam. But the British Empire, you don't see a huge amount of revolutions. You see some, and there's obviously a lot of social upheaval, but the British Empire kind of just decides to end in many ways. And there's a lot of pressure from the United States to do that. Thank you. Welcome from Pakistan. Great to have you here. What wasn't accurate? What did I miss? Yeah, I'm not smart. Like Socrates, I know one thing above all, and I know that I know nothing. And if you think it's yapping, then I'm sorry, I can't help you there. Who told you all this information? Reading books, professors, trying to retain everything I possibly can, watching videos. I've got some great YouTube video channels that I know. So if you want to know some of those, I'd be sure to recommend you to them. They are fantastic. Do you believe people should be held accountable for the actions of their ancestors? No. I don't think people should be held accountable for the actions of their ancestors because in our ancestral lines, we have people who did amazing things and we had terrible things. So are we going to make a scorecard and things like that? I mean, Stalin's daughter, the daughter of a dictator who killed 20 million people, went to Seattle and opened a clothing store, and nobody is knocking on her door demanding that she be arrested. It's that simple. I think that ancestors create certain social conditions that we have to address and look at, and I think that's a perfectly fair thing to do, and that's what social scientists, sociologists, people like that do. But what historians do is we look at the history of individual groups of people, and we look at, but that also involves looking at the history of individuals, looking at biographies. I mean, I do a Born Today and Die Today video every day for famous historical figures who pass away, so check that out if you're interested there. But it's not our job to basically say the descendants of certain people deserve judgment unless they are following along. Do you have ceiling burbs? Don't know what that is. Okay, talked about the Balfour Declaration. What history are you familiar with? As much as I possibly can be. I like to consider myself a history chameleon. Whatever history I'm learning about right now tends to be my favorite. So any history you would like to talk about, I'm either going to learn about it for your sake so that we can talk about it at another time, or I'm going to talk about it today. Play guitar and sing. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I play guitar. I'm not a good singer, so don't expect me to sing. I'm not going to sing on the live stream, although a lot of people want me to. I could try to hum or do something once in a while if we're having fun, but it's not going to sound good, and you guys will need to, you guys may need some ear bandages or something. Just stumble upon your live stream. What's your content about greens? Oh, from New Zealand. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. My content is social sciences and history. If you haven't figured that out, I hope you're still in there. What about the World's Fair and the mud floors? I'm not sure what you mean by that. I'm not particularly familiar. I know one of the World's Fairs, one of the first ones, was held in Chicago in the 1880s. And it was actually held right across the street from the murder hotel where one of America's first and most infamous serial killers, H.H. Holmes, was living. And he was actually luring women there and torturing them and murdering them. And nobody knew. And it was during the Chicago's World Fair that he drew in most of his victims. Eventually, they found him and executed him. But do I think the British Empire is the greatest empire of all time? I definitely want to do a tier list of empires. People have asked me who the worst dictator is. I want to do a tier list of terrible dictators. I think the British Empire, I think the Roman is the most fascinating for most people because it just seems like no matter what happens, people want to recreate it in one way, shape, or form. So I think as a historian, the Roman Empire is the most fascinating. I think the British they're probably the most expansive and successful. So I guess I might answer yes. Herodotus. So Herodotus is one of my forebearers, one of the first historians ever. And what Herodotus does that we love as historians is that he basically goes around interviewing people and having them tell their oral histories, and then he compiles it into a secondary history of different events. So it's really interesting. That sounds like a great book. I'll have to read that. Welcome from Scotland. Free Northern Ireland. Interesting. Name one thought that's original that you didn't read in a book. Okay, that's a good challenge, actually. One thought that's original that you didn't read in the book. I'm going to have to think about that one for a minute. I mean, most ideas, especially for a historian, come from other historians. So a lot of the theories that I have, I've heard before, and I've come to like them and kind of adopt them. Yeah, I don't know if I agree with Nasser on that one, Lorenzo. I think Nasser is a fascinating individual. His ability to kind of free Egypt, not just from the British, but also from this Cold War tension and the way he took over the Suez Canal. And he's definitely a successful leader. And Egypt has forever been shaped by its military ever since him. But I don't know if he's right about that with the Jews. Algeria is really fascinating. There's a lot of crossroads. So we were talking about the Maghreb. We were talking about the Muslims conquering northern Africa. So Algeria is part of that conquest. If I'm correct, the Romans had occupied at least part of Algeria. And Algeria was considered the biggest prize in the French crown. So the French have a huge empire in the late 19th, early 20th century that includes West Africa. And they consider Algeria to be the diamond in their jewel in their crown, basically, and they fight a long war with the Algerians to hold on to it, and the Algerians absolutely embarrass them. Right after they lose it to the Vietnamese, they try to hold on to Algeria, and they're just not able to, and the Algerians absolutely embarrass them. And basically, the French consider the Algerians to be, along with the Lebanese, to be like second-class Frenchmen, like almost French in many, many ways. So it's a fascinating place. I've got to learn a little bit more about the native people's history there, but that's a little bit of what I know. I love medieval history. I'm glad you brought that up. I've talked about that a lot on the channel. There's just something about knights and lords and ladies in the feudal system that really appeals to me. Who will win, Trump or Kamala? I don't know. I was just talking about this. I try not to address the politics too much, but I definitely think it's basically a toss-up right now. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Who do you think played? This is a great question. I just talked about this last week with the whole Tucker Carlson debacle. Who do you think played a bigger part in World War II, Britain or America? I'm going to go with America. I think it's close, though, because I think Britain kind of holds down the fort while America is kind of getting ready. Basically, President Roosevelt, still in the Great Depression, goes to American manufacturers and tells them to start producing goods. And military production actually starts to catch up. They're nowhere near where they need to be in 1940, or they're a little bit closer in 1941. And by 1942, 1943, they've actually outpaced the Germans. So the Allies, particularly the Americans, beat the Germans and the Japanese, not by having better technology, but by outproducing their opponents. It's a fascinating story. So Britain's kind of holding down that fort. And a lot of people are criticizing Tucker Carlson, like Daryl Cooper is doing, because Daryl Cooper doesn't know much about history, and neither does Tucker Carlson for that matter. I talked about that on the live stream last week. Go check that out if you're interested there. But basically, I think the United States kind of carries the biggest weight. I think the Soviets get underestimated a lot. They're huge. They're the ones that get to Berlin first and force the Germans to surrender. And obviously, if Hitler had not invaded the Soviet Union, it's very possible he could have at least had a stalemate in the war. The Soviets are able to really whoop him. And interestingly enough, he had allied with the Soviets, split up Poland, and then invaded them because they were the enemies, because Nazis and communists hate each other. And then the Americans had this notion that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So not only were Americans rooting for Stalin, they actually ally with Stalin. They start sending him weapons and ammunition. And that might have very well allowed the Soviets to hold out. Same thing with the British. So Americans sending supplies to the British and the Russians and embargoing the Japanese and the Germans and putting sanctions on them probably helps before they join the war. And then, of course, after they join the war, they are a formidable fighting force in North Africa. They're a formidable fighting force in the Pacific, and they're a formidable fighting force after D-Day in Europe. So, and they've got some of the best generals. They got Eisenhower and Patton. I mean, those are the two heavyweights. I have gaps in my teeth. Fascinating, amazing commentary. No, I don't know about the Black Tom event. That sounds kind of interesting. I do need a haircut. I do need a haircut. So thank you for pointing that out. If you're liking and enjoying what we're talking about, please be sure to subscribe. Bring up any history topics you want to talk about. I'm trying to get through as much as I possibly can here. You guys have been wonderful so far. What do I think about Fidel Castro in Cuba? So obviously, I don't approve of what Fidel Castro did in Cuba. I think he's a authoritarian dictator who repressed the rights of his people, and you can see this by throwing people in prison, killing them, and people leaving the island trying to get away. From what I have been reading about the history, Batista had already promised to leave office if he had lost, and he had promised a fair and free election, and Castro wasn't about to let that happen. He wanted a communist revolution, so he overthrew Batista. It would have been very interesting had Castro waited to see what would have happened in Cuba if Batista was keeping his word. He was a dictator in his own way, so who knows if he would have even kept it, because dictators almost never keep their word. But who knows what would have happened. Is it tomorrow, the Great Women Leaders? Thank you for bringing that up. I am starting a new short series starting on Monday about great female leaders. I am wrapping up my Roman series this week. Which Roman empires? Well, there's a lot of them. The basic ones that I attribute to is the main Roman Empire, and then you have the Western and Eastern Roman Empire, and then the Byzantines, which is the Eastern Roman Empire that continues after the West falls in 476 AD. Thank you for that like. It helps grow the channel. Really appreciate it. Yeah, King Leopold is a horrible human being, oppressing the Belgian Congo. It's one of the worst stories in human history, what they do. Basically, if any King Leopold, who is in charge of the country of Belgium, basically occupies the Congo in the 1880s and makes it his own private possession. And if the people of the Congo do not do what he says in collecting palm oil and rubber, which becomes huge for the Belgians, they lose their hands. And so you will find pictures on the internet of Belgian children in Africa working for minimal wages and being oppressed, and they are to mine rubber and other goods for the Belgians, and they are missing their hands. It's gruesome and it's hard to look at. Is Indian natives of America the right thing to call? It all depends. Inuits are usually referred to as people who are native to northwestern Canada and Alaska. Indians, Native Americans, I used to be really PC about the whole Native American, call them Native Americans, but now that I understand the root origin of Indians and why Columbus called them Indians, and it wasn't an insult, it wasn't because he was stupid and thought he was in India, then now I know it's actually, it's not a totally inappropriate thing to call them. So let's see here. Stereotypes, I don't know what you quite mean there. Yeah, and really a lot of the Greco-Roman buildings are just kind of happenstance. If you find them in India and places like that, it's because the Greeks got that far. They got to Afghanistan and India, and that's where Alexander's men gave up on him, and Alexander the Great had to stop conquering. Let me see here. Anyways, yeah, I'm doing my best to give you as much fascinating information as possible, so if you really are liking it, be sure to like and subscribe. It's not pointless rambling. If you would ask a question, I would be happy to answer it. I try not to have biases. Everyone has biases. I mean, I think something that I really appreciate about the YouTube history scene is that it's pretty objective for the most part because YouTube historians, myself included, do our absolute best to look at different sources, look at the secondary sources, then look at the primary sources, see what the perspectives are, and we try to build from that imagine you've got all these different sources that you're compiling together and you're building a cohesive united narrative, and that's what historians do. And then we have to judge for ourselves. So the more historians you're consulting, the less chance you have of bias. Every historian is biased, yes, and that means me too. I am human and I fail, and I apologize for that. I do my absolute best. I remember I made a video and I was talking about the 1936 Munich Olympics, and I came out with a lot of egg on my face because I was thinking of the 1972 Munich Olympics, but I just did an entire video and just kept saying Munich, 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 and that's where Jesse Owens showed up the Nazis and all of that, and it was during the Olympic season, and it really embarrassed the heck out of me, and I felt really bad about that. So I make mistakes all the time. So not only do I make mistakes, but I am also fallible, and I have my own biases, and I try very much to not let them come out. I did a poll a couple weeks ago because I've been doing political content on the channel, and I asked my wonderful followers and subscribers if they thought I was biased politically, and I put up all the options, and a majority of them said I was right-leaning. So I don't know where that came from, but I'm trying to be as objective as possible, even in my political commentary. So, any thoughts about Jose Rizal? I don't know about that. Is it true Hannibal colonized India? No. Hannibal gets pretty far. Hannibal's excellent because he's able to utilize mercenaries. So a lot of empires have had to use mercenaries at different times. The British use them. The French use them. The Romans use mercenaries later on when their population rates are low. And the Carthaginians always had fewer people than the Romans, and so they couldn't match the Romans with a native army. So they used mercenaries and especially elephants. And I think you might be thinking of where Hannibal got his elephants. And I don't believe he ever got them from India. He didn't get that far. He got into Spain. So we were talking about the history of Spain. We're talking about how Spain got free of the Muslims. Before that, Spain had been part of the Roman Empire for centuries. And before that, the Carthaginians had actually conquered Spain. So the way Rome gets Spain is by defeating the Carthaginians in the Second and Third Punic Wars, in which they destroy them. Punic, by the way, comes from the ancient Latin word for Phoenicians, who were the Semitic peoples who sailed across the Mediterranean and landed in northwestern Africa and settled what became known as Carthage. So Carthage is the society, but it is also the name of their big city, which was destroyed in the Third Punic War. So Hannibal did not get to India. He gets into Spain, and he uses elephants to cross over the Alps from Switzerland into Italy, and he gets very far. And the way the Romans defeat him is they send their forces into North Africa, into the heart of Carthage, and he has to go back, and that's where he's defeated by the famous Scipio Africanus. Could you explain the origin of the word Indian? Because I thought it was... So the origin of the word Indian, when we refer to Native Americans, is a lot of people, like myself, used to believe, oh, he called them Indians because he thought he was in India. It seems to be that it comes from his diaries, which calls the natives un gente indios, Indian. And of course, from that root, we get indigenous and things like that, and Inuit, not Intuit, that's taxes. But basically, that seems to be where Columbus gets his notion of calling them Indian. So I thought it was a mistake too. I was actually recently corrected on that, although it might be because of that. But un gente indios is what Columbus called them in his journals. So anyways, where are you from? I try to keep my location and my personal identity as quiet as possible. Do the history on cigarette. I know a little bit about cigarettes. So I don't smoke cigarettes, but basically cigarettes become popular because they're cheaper and easier to make, and they have tobacco and the tar and the nicotine than cigars. In the late 19th century, people smoked cigars, and they smoked a lot of cigars. In fact, President Ulysses S. Grant dies because he's addicted to cigars and chewing tobacco, and he gets mouth cancer. He would actually chew tobacco leaves, just straight up leaves, not even the snuff. The cigarettes become popular because they're cheaper, they're easier to hold, and you can get the nicotine from them. So cigarettes don't really become popular until the 1910s, and especially in the 1920s during the era of Prohibition and the speakeasies. Yeah, history can be twisted and manipulated, and hopefully, I'm doing my best not to do that. Yeah, a lot of historians think that it's best to use newer sources. The newer sources are always better, but if you're going back to the original sources, you're going to have to go back to ancient stuff. Yeah, it's not as cushy. It's a little stiffer than it looks, but I do like sitting in it. Thank you. Let me see. Yeah, I try my best to stay out of politics, and if I do get involved, I try to be as fair and objective as possible. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, the world fairs are amazing. It's basically a way for the Europeans and the Americans to show off their power and their influence. We were talking about the settlement of Africa. One of the worst parts of the world fairs, though, is that in a lot of these exhibitions, as they were called, they actually have human zoos where they bring natives from their colonies and have them sit in cages so that Europeans who have never seen someone of a different color can gawk at them. I mean, it's just the British do this, the Germans, the Belgians. It's really, really awful. Um, Fun fact, last week I was talking about Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, maybe the greatest love story in European history. Prince Albert was actually really dedicated to these world fairs and exhibitions and setting them up, and it was a way to showcase new inventions, new discoveries. Edison does that here in the United States. See, I just let it out. I'm from the United States. Not going to be specific about where, but yeah. What is your historical perspective on the situation of the Palestinians and the Israelis? So good. I'm glad you asked that. Everybody asks that. Basically, you have two groups of people who have centuries-long claims to the land. The Israelis, technically speaking, the Jewish peoples, have a longer claim to the land than the Palestinian people. If you look at the Arabs, Arab peoples in that land, Muslims in that land, Islam comes about in 600 AD. There is historical evidence of Jewish peoples and Hebrews being there 1500 years before that. However, that obviously does not mean that because one people lives in a land later on doesn't mean they can be depopulated. If I believed that, I would believe that white people needed to leave the United States because they obviously weren't there when the Native Americans were first there. So there's got to be some way to find some form of coexistence. Obviously, war is not the best way to do it. Obviously, bombing is not the best way to do it. And obviously, being run by a terrorist organization that takes hostages is not a good way to do it either. So they've got to figure out a different way to do it. But historically speaking, you have historic, religious, and cultural claims by both groups of people, as both Jews and Muslims find historical ties, and the Arabs, to that land. What one group that has been pushed out of that area and has history there are the Christians. There are very, very few Christians compared to the number of Palestinians and Jews living in Israel at this time. And of course, Christianity starts in that area of the world in many ways. So there's got to be some way to find coexistence, but that's just a historical perspective at the moment. Do I think the Bible is an accurate history book? Well, let me put it to you this way. When I look at the history, when you look at ancient histories, a lot of people expect ancient histories to be ancient history books. And because of that, when they read accounts like the gospel accounts, they think that those books, because they have miracles and things like that, are not accurate. However, Thucydides and Herodotus, two of the earliest historians, also have miraculous encounters with the gods interfering to help the Greeks during the Peloponnesian War or during Alexander or during these things. Or Herodotus, they were writing before Alexander. But basically, a lot of ancient historians, whether they be the gospel writers or Herodotus, they are attempting to write histories, and they are putting in miraculous events. So it's not uncommon at that time to have that. So do I think it's an accurate history book? There's definitely history in it, but it's not. But I would say, from what I understand, the Bible is not a history or science book in and of itself. I should be Secretary of State. I don't know if I would do a good job at that. I don't think I could do the job I'm supposed to. Besides, it would get me away from history and being with you guys, so I don't want to do that. Yeah, America was colonized by the Europeans. Absolutely, there's no way around it. Yeah, it's not Canada. The British use Canada during the War of 1812, and they land in the Chesapeake Bay, and they go into the White House. They have dinner because the President James Madison fled with his wife, and there's food left out. So the British officers actually eat dinner. Then they burn down the Capitol and White House in 1814. It's a war a lot of people don't know about, especially in America, because America does really poorly in this war. And obviously, the big story just today is the anniversary of when Francis Scott Key saw the flag still flying over in Baltimore at Fort McHenry and decided to pen his poem in defense, or the defense of Fort McHenry. So, yeah, the Philippines basically has had a history. We're just talking about the Empire of Spain. The reason it's called the Philippines is because it's named after King Philip II of Spain, who colonized it in the 1560s. The Spanish have had a huge influence over the Philippines. That is why Spanish is spoken there. That is why the Philippines is mainly Catholic. In the late 1800s, the United States trying to build an empire under President William McKinley, who died on this day after being shot, by the way. Again, all this stuff is on channel if you're interested in that. Basically, the Philippines get their independence from the Spanish with the help of the Americans, and a man named Emilio Aguinaldo thinks that he can create an independent state of people in the Philippines. And the United States at first says, sure, of course. And then all of a sudden they're like, actually, you're uncivilized. We've got you. You're going to have to learn from us. They take over. He rebels, and this leads to a 15-year-long insurrection and revolution against the United States by Aguinaldo and his forces. And the U.S. colonizes and controls the Philippines. Then in World War II, the Japanese take them over. They do horrible things to the Filipino people. The death marches of Boots Bataan. And then the Americans come back, retake the islands. And after World War II, as a show of goodwill towards democracy and kind of a movement against the communists and the Soviets, the Americans give the Philippines their independence. And ever since then, the Philippines has been its own independent archipelago. I want to learn more about the individual history of the Philippines, especially before the Spanish show up. Breed half. Yes, the Romans used attack dogs. Yeah, the Romans were very effective at using attack dogs. Let's see here. A gift of 18 dogs from the Persians. It was John Smith called them Indians. Yes, and that was actually one of the nicer things. So John Smith, actually, this week was the anniversary of when John Smith took over at Jamestown. He was only the governor for a year, but he helped revitalize them, mainly because he started to build a bridge with the Powhatan Indians. He is the guy from Pocahontas who was supposedly going to be killed, and she intervenes to save his life. Whether or not that's true, we have no idea. That's where kind of historical myth and Americana mixes with actual history. So, can you shout out my friend? Which friend? We are Egyptian. Why are Egyptian artifacts, mummies, pictures, and proof of culture in the West, for example? I don't know what you mean by that. Making mummies, building pyramids, building structures, ziggurats, high towers, that's not native to Egypt. There are more pyramids in Kush, Nubia, in Sudan, than there are in Egypt. The Chinese built pyramids. The South and Central Americans built pyramids. The idea of having very large religious buildings is all over the world. So mummification was not just Egyptian. Let me see. Yes, it's not just one good thing or one bad thing. That's an excellent point, Blue Baron. Thank you. Let me see. All right, a lot of people of you are talking about politics. That's great. The topic is whatever you would like to talk about. I'm just going through the questions, comments, trying to catch up. Everybody's asking about a lot of really good stuff. I don't know where you were when you came in, so I don't know what I was going on about. What am I misrepresenting? That's interesting. I'm happy to learn, but you've got to show me what I'm misrepresenting, not just say that. What is the history of Orange County, California? Well, a large area of Southern California was oranges and orange fields. So people make jokes about, oh, when I was young, this was all orange trees and fields. And it's actually kind of true. In fact, Walt Disney, who I was going to talk about on the stream, bought the land that was a bunch of orange fields, flattened it, and turned it into Disneyland. Where? Anaheim in Orange County. And that was in the 50s. In fact, he built Disneyland before Disney World. Let me see here. Okay, what about the Rothschilds in Palestine? I don't know anything about that. I am not going into any conspiracy theories. I'm not afraid of any of those things. I try to be a fun person to be around. I hope you're saying that to me. Okay, well, I've had the channel report before. I've had people block me. I've had people say terrible things about me. So you're just one of many. Yeah, the British definitely won that war. Thank you for saying that. If you really enjoy this, hit the like button, subscribe. It really helps grow the channel. Yes, it does have an account. There is actually predictions in the Bible about the rise of King Alexander and stuff like that. I think I finally have caught up to the chat, so that's good. Yeah, that's an interesting story. The story of Pershing. I used to believe it. It doesn't. It seems to be a little bit of an exaggeration. So, according to some, during the Filipino Revolution, many of the Filipinos were Muslim, and General John Blackjack Pershing, one of the greatest American generals who helped lead America through World War One, he actually would take a Muslim insurgent. He would two of them, two prisoners. He would kill one and throw him in a pit with a pig. Supposedly, this made him unclean, and so that he could not go into the presence of Allah because he was with a pig. And he would tell the survivor, "You go tell your people this is what we're going to do to you." There's no real historical evidence. In fact, it's probably a historical myth, which I do on the channel from time to time, so maybe I should cover that one. But I have read more established. It's a funny, interesting urban legend. It's kind of interesting, and I hate it because when things like that are untrue, it makes history sound less interesting, but there's a lot of interesting things in history. I don't think it's true. I'm going to rate it false on my scale. I mean, I'm not the most intelligent person on live. If Neil deGrasse Tyson goes live, I'm already lost. So there you go. I did not know about them invading Canada after after the Civil War. They do try to invade Canada in the American Revolution and the War of 1812. Both go disastrously bad for the Americans. Thank you. I'm so glad you found it. I'm glad you're here. Like, subscribe, check out the content. Thank you. I really appreciate that. What is the history of Vlad the Impaler? So I've done this and talked about this before on the channel. I used to do a series of Did You Know and historical myths, and now I've restarted both series. But basically, Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Tepes, is a Wallachian, which is modern-day Romania, Transylvania, that whole area. He's a prince, and he is the client state of the Hungarians, and he's helping them fight against the Ottoman Turks. They're both Christians. They're both trying to fight the Muslims who have kind of overwhelmed the Byzantines and are now invading Europe. And so Vlad, in order to send a message to his enemies, uses impaling. He kills thousands of people this way through impaling them. And from that, he becomes known for his bloodlust. He tortures his enemies. He kills them. And he is one of the most violent rulers in Eastern Europe. But he also continually is able to throw off the yoke of the Turks. And so he's a very good general. He's a very good fighter. And he keeps his area relatively free for the time being from the Muslim incursions. So in many ways, he's become a hero and is a hero to the Romanians and the Moldovians. However, he has become known more as a dark, sinister character. There is no exact correlation that Bram Stoker deliberately used him to make Dracula, but there is some idea that he is the inspiration for Stoker creating Dracula because of Tepes, the Impaler's bloodlust. So, yeah, definitely. And the more knowledge I get, the more the mole grows. Thank you. That's an extraordinarily thoughtful contribution. Abraham Lincoln had a mole like this and grew the beard to hide it. So maybe I should just grow a beard. So I tend to think a lot of things that are true that people don't want to hear are told it's a myth. Why would the Pershing story be false, but our stories are true from a historical perspective? Well, that's an excellent question. I really appreciate that. And that's because those stories probably aren't true either. And my channel actually has a whole list of videos about historical myths, and I try to do one every day. There's tons. I talked about it earlier. Columbus calling the natives Indians. A lot of people think that Columbus went to America because he wanted to prove that the world was round. That's absolute nonsense. The Europeans knew the world was round. The ancients knew the world was round. It's very, very few people who believe that the earth was flat at that time. So that's actually not true that Columbus wanted to prove the earth was round. I talked about it in the channel last week. Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake. Never said that. So it's not that there's just one myth with the Pershing story. There's a lot of myths that people need to be they need to be unburdened by what has been, to quote a political candidate. So I would love to tour the castle. I've seen pictures of it. It looks beautiful. The great castles of Europe just seem so fascinating, and they're just so big and expansive. And there's just so many of them in France and England and Germany. I wouldn't know how to stay or live in one of them. Interesting. That's funny. So they kind of sabotage them. That's really interesting. A bunch of Irish immigrants try to invade Canada, probably because they were mad at the British Empire for starving them to death. A huge reason a large number of Irish farmers come over to the United States is because they are being starved to death by the British, who are extracting potatoes when there is a scarcity of potatoes on the island of Ireland. Hi, thank you. Do you know who Arad is? No. So what living things clump? So he brought back obviously he brings back cash crops. So cotton, tobacco, sugar, these are all going to become huge exports for the Europeans, for the Spanish Empire. It's going to make them very wealthy. In fact, the English and the French figure out that it's the cash crops that make them wealthy. Harvesting and farming things like tobacco, cotton, and sugar is more lucrative than actually getting gold and silver, because you can continually rely on these things rather than running out of gold or silver in a particular mine. And so you can take the cash crops and sell them back in Europe, and this creates triangular trade. They will go to Europe, bring in the cash crops, sell them for other goods, take those goods to Africa, and sell those goods to the Africans for slaves, and then take the slaves back to mine and farm. So one of the reasons the Spanish Empire declines is because it's a mining economy, and it is not a renewable resource the way cotton or tobacco can be in plantations. So although the Spanish do build plantations, like for instance sugarcane and tobacco in Cuba. So the lost cause. I don't know that I believe it, but people calling it a myth is assuming they know what. I mean, I believe you're talking about the last cause myth in. Thank you for liking and subscribing. Really helpful. Really grows the channel. Yeah, the last cause myth is actually the second video I ever made on this channel, more than 6 months ago. I remember I made that video and I got a lot of, and I was like, I went to bed and I'm like, I don't expect anything. The next day I woke up and 400 people had seen it. And I remember waking up my girlfriend and I was all excited because 400 people had seen my video. And since then we've had a lot of videos with a lot more views that have been really wonderful. I don't see it. Maybe you're just thinking of your own nose. Maybe you're looking in the mirror. But anyways, so that's actually the second video I ever talked about the lost cause myth. It's a total myth. This idea that, first of all, it's a myth that the Civil War was not fought about slavery and that it was originally about states' rights. That's complete malarkey. And I see that, and I talked about this in channel last week because I talked about the Civil War. I see a lot of people on both extremes arguing that. One extreme wants to say the Civil War wasn't about slavery because they want to take away from the greatness of the Civil War in the sense of ending slavery. And the other side wants to defend the antebellum's old South as a good place in some ways. So they want to say, oh, it really wasn't about slavery. And they do the same thing with the lost cause myth. No, it wasn't. These weren't heroic people fighting to maintain their way of life. They were fighting a moral war to be able to keep their slaves. They wanted to have states' rights so that they could have a right to own slaves. They wanted a different economy that relied on slavery, and they wanted to expand into the Western territory so that slavery could go there too. Yeah. So let's see. Also, if the Napoleonic War wasn't happening, Britain would probably have went to war with America again. Basically the War of 1812, the British kind of, for lack of a better term, half-ass it in order for the American, and basically it's all because for years the British and French have been taking American ships and taking sailors from them, and the Americans had been going back and forth on who to support, and eventually they throw in their allegiance with Napoleon, who they had just bought a huge amount of land from in the Louisiana Purchase. That's right, France owned a large amount of American land once, and in Canada too. And the Americans bought a bunch of land from the French and kind of threw their lot in with Napoleon. And the British are more concerned with unseating him, obviously the Duke of Wellington, things like that. And then in the meantime, they send kind of their secondary army to spank the Americans, which they absolutely do in the War of 1812. And America wins some small victories here and there, like the Battle of New Orleans and the Battle of Lake Erie. But really, the British basically, after defeating Napoleon, they're not going to take American ships anymore because they're not at war with the French, so they're not going to need the cargo or the sailors who they capture. So basically, the point of the war, the reason America had tried to stop them from doing this, really doesn't exist anymore, so the war becomes pointless. And it's actually after that that Britain and the United States over the decades to come start to become allies because of their shared heritage and culture. That's where Beef Wellington comes from. It's named after the Duke of Wellington, who led the British forces to defeat Napoleon finally at the Battle of Waterloo. And that was actually after Napoleon had been exiled and came back and took over France again, which is a crazy story. Basically, Napoleon had been defeated by the Russians, and the Russians, the Prussians, the Prussians, I shouldn't say the Germans, the Prussians, the Austrians, and the British unseat him and exile him. Then he builds an army and comes back. He escapes the British. He lands in France, and a bunch of French soldiers chase after him to kill him. And he walks up to them. He rips open his coat and he says, "I am your emperor. Here is your target. Will you strike me?" And the French soldiers, rather than realizing that they are going to kill Napoleon, their greatest general and leader in the last few centuries, maybe ever, decide to throw in their lot with him, and they put him back in charge. He builds up an army, and then he goes to Waterloo, and he's crushed by the British and the Prussians. So that's why we get the name of, that's where we get, and the Duke of Wellington is obviously the big hero there, and we obviously get the name of a food dish, Beef Wellington, from him. Interesting. Still under Napoleon law. I don't know what you mean. Napoleon does create one of the most modern and progressive legal codes in human history. It's quite fascinating. Are you a professional historian or an expert hobbyist? You seem very knowledgeable. I appreciate that. I like to consider myself both. Whenever I'm doing history, I'm a historian. This is not my profession. I'm not full-time YouTubing, but that's the long-term goal. So, imagine if Britain was petty enough to actually go to war. Yeah, they were kind of war weary. Europe was kind of war weary, and because of that, basically, the Europeans agree that they are not going to fight each other anymore on land. Napoleon has changed the game so much that by that time, the Europeans are actually just going to kind of give up and just focus on colonizing people that they deem uncivilized, meaning they don't have the technological or economic strength to fight back, Africa and Asia. Anyways, shout out to New Orleans. Yep, definitely. Great city. By the firemen? What do you mean by the firemen? Anyways, so we usually go about an hour here on the channel, and we are just over an hour. And I think I finally was able to catch up and answer all of the comments, all the historical stuff, and I appreciate all of you for bringing that up and bringing up some really important topics to talk about, and I really appreciate everybody attending. Oh, the Great Fire of London. Yeah, so the Great Fire of London is in 1666. I thought that's what he might be referring to. It burns down 13,000 houses, even burns down St. Paul's Cathedral, and it kind of ruins the reign of King Charles II, who has to spend the rest of his reign rebuilding the old city. So, into a new city. So, have you seen the Napoleon movie? Yeah, I really want to see it. I feel so bad, and I haven't seen. People love to bring up the Napoleon movie and Hacksaw Ridge. I have not seen either. I have seen Oppenheimer. I really just want to sit down and just go through that Napoleon movie. And I know it's a 2-hour movie. It's really long, but I'm probably going to be pausing and reading stuff and thinking about it. That would be fun to live stream that and talk about the movie with you guys. However, I think I'd probably get copyrighted. But anyways, it looks really epic, really interesting. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, he did a good job of Gladiator. Gladiator is actually, believe it or not, based in some history. I mean, it's highly exaggerated, as will Gladiator 2 be, no doubt. No, I did not. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the liking and the subscribing. But yeah, it did miss so much. A lot of historical movies do. I don't know if the Napoleon movie is trying to be accurate. I will say the Sphinx loses its nose because of Napoleon's men practicing with cannon fire and it being knocked off. So that's an interesting one. But I really appreciate everybody, your liking, your subscribing, all the great questions. We've had a really successful live stream, and we will be back here tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. in London and Paris, 10 p.m. in Israel. And we will be talking about more history topics. I've got a few things to bring up. We got through Spain. I want to talk about Poland. I want to talk about Walt Disney, believe it or not. I want to talk about the longest reigning European monarch ever. So... Remember when America invented one province? Yeah, in fact, the Northwestern Territory was actually shared. The Oregon Territory was shared, and parts of British Columbia were shared between the British and the Americans. So, but yeah, definitely come on down tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern, and we will talk more. Yeah, and there's going to be invaded. Yeah, you know, it did. That's true. Yeah, invaded. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, there's definitely Americans kind of having this desire to kind of control Canada. And eventually, America, and a lot of people would argue America as an empire, learned that the way to control other people wasn't to conquer them because they're always going to be trying to rebel. It was through hegemonic and economic influence. And that's why a lot of people believe that America is an empire, just not a land empire. So, anyways, I really appreciate everybody coming in. I'm looking forward to seeing you all tomorrow on the next live stream, 4 o'clock right here. We will see you then. Have a great rest of your evening and enjoy your Saturday. Take care and keep up with the history. Have a good one. Bye bye now.